2/3 of the world's cancer-related deaths can be traced back to tobacco use. Although the correlation between these cancer-related deaths and tobacco is common knowledge today, this was not always the case. For years, the tobacco industry used a series of successful marketing strategies that made tobacco use dominate in popular culture. It was not until the release of a health report in the 1950s that the public began to recognize tobacco use as a national health problem. In 1953, when Time and Life magazines published the results of a scientific study linking cancer and tobacco, the tobacco companies encountered new challenges for maintaining their consumer base. In order to prevent drops in sales, these companies explored new advertising strategies that focused on tobacco safety and the recruitment of new customers. At the turn of the 20th century, rapid industrialization and mechanization dominated factory life in the United States. The tobacco industry capitalized on the use of the assembly line by mass-producing their products. The stresses of the machine age encouraged the workers to seek vices, such as alcohol and tobacco use. In the early 1900s, demand for cigarettes dramatically increased, and the tobacco factories kept up with this demand by producing at a new level. In 1917, after the United States entered into World War I, about 5 billion cigarettes were given as rations to the soldiers. As the consumer base increased, the tobacco industry explored new ways to appeal to their buyers. The companies highlighted the image of the American soldier in their advertisements in order to sell more cigarettes in the United States. New advertising strategies, such as connecting consumption of cigarettes with one's patriotic duty, became a popular tool for the tobacco companies. A result of this effort was that thousands of soldiers returned with a tobacco addiction much stronger than they had prior to the war. In the 1920s, most Americans enjoyed an economic prosperity. This allowed citizens to spend money on simple luxuries. With the increase in popularity of magazines such as Ladies' Home Journal and the Saturday Evening Post, advertisers reached millions of consumers on a daily or weekly basis. Companies hired movie stars and sports figures to entice consumers to buy their products. These advertisements embodied the image of the 20s by portraying a glamorous and successful life. Mass marketing of consumer products expanded with the introduction of the radio. This allowed the tobacco industry to advertise to a broader audience. Using medical endorsements was another strategy of the tobacco companies. Doctors were the most popular spokesperson for cigarette advertisements. The tobacco industry used the strategy of linking tobacco consumption to health benefits. By the mid-1930s, Philip Morris took the use of health claims a step further, designing a campaign that used a new strategy of referring directly to research conducted by physicians, claiming that their cigarettes were proven to be less irritating. Cigarettes were thought of as sanitary, and doctors informed the public that it cleaned out your lungs. This strategy led the public to believe that cigarettes were not harmful. With the growing popularity of the film industry, tobacco companies targeted its audiences and used movie theaters as a tool to advertise smoking.
Be happy, go lucky, get better taste today.
In 1941, America entered into the Second World War, boosting tobacco sales to record-breaking levels of consumption. Cigarettes were so popular among the troops that numerous camps around Europe were nicknamed after various cigarette brands. During this time, it was believed and promoted by advertisers that cigarettes actually helped anxiety, a useful message during wartime for both soldiers and loved ones at home. Though earlier studies linked cancer and tobacco use, the newest study by 3 scientists concluded tumors were caused by tobacco. The experiment was done by painting cigarette smoke tar onto the backs of mice. This was a watershed moment for public opinion because it was released in 2 of the most widely circulated magazines in America. When Time and Life magazines published the results that tobacco caused cancerous tumors, news of the research reached millions of consumers. Public opinion was shaken after this. The tobacco industry encountered new challenges to maintain their consumer base. Despite the tobacco industry's attempt to advertise the health benefits of its product, this was seen as a public health scare. One new strategy used by the industry was denial. On December 14, 1953, the CEOs of the 7 leading tobacco companies met in Manhattan to plan ways to refute the evidence and attempt to salvage cigarette sales. They collectively agreed to deny the evidence through a public announcement that discredited the experiment published in Time and Life magazines. As a result, they exchanged their focus of their old advertising techniques that concentrated on the filterless cigarette to new products such as filtered cigarettes and smokeless tobacco. The tobacco industry's strategy was to market these products as safe and hire chemists and doctors to support their claims.
That's what I call the tragic irony of this entire epidemic. The cigarette industry was making cigarettes milder and milder, and in doing that, people perceived them as safer and safer. But the fact is they were becoming more and more deadly because they were easier to inhale.
Cigarette companies not only faced problems concerning public opinion, but also new regulation that the United States government enforced. The government at this time recognized the danger in tobacco and therefore made it required that the Surgeon General warning be displayed on every tobacco product. The tobacco industry once again encountered a new obstacle to their marketing strategies that forced them to devise another plan. A new tactic of the tobacco industry was to target an untapped customer base, the youth. Prior to the medical discovery, it wasn't uncommon for kids to smoke cigarettes. However, tobacco companies had never directly targeted them in their advertising. According to a 1973 tobacco company R.J. Reynolds internal memo, attracting underage smokers was a primary objective. The result was R.J. Reynolds' highly successful Joe Camel campaign. Joe Camel was introduced in the summer of 1988, a cartoon character created to capture a larger segment of the youth market. It was reported that Joe Camel ads were far more successful at marketing Camel cigarettes to children than to adults.
Kids love Joe. Researchers in 1991 found more kids knew Joe Camel than knew Mickey Mouse.
R.J. Reynolds finally ended the Joe Camel campaign in 1997 in the face of lawsuits, congressional scrutiny, and public outrage. The outrage over targeting the youth forced Congress to take action against the tobacco industry. The Master Settlement Agreement enforced restrictions on the sale and marketing of cigarettes by cigarette manufacturers. This prohibited any form of advertising that directly or indirectly targeted the youth. Throughout the entire legal negotiation, the tobacco companies still refused to admit that their products were addictive.
Nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
And I too believe that nicotine is not addictive.
Dr. Campbell.
However, the tobacco companies lost, which resulted in the ban of any use of cartoons in tobacco advertising. Yet the MSA did not stop the R.J. Reynolds campaign towards children. Instead, the tobacco companies sought new avenues to entice young adult consumers. In 2004, the Camel Candy Store opened, selling a wide array of flavored cigarettes. Yet all this came to a halt on June 22, 2009, when the Tobacco Control Act was signed into law. This act gave authority to the Food and Drug Administration to regulate the marketing of tobacco products.
It's been a long time coming. We've known for years, even decades, about the harmful, addictive, and often deadly effects of tobacco products. Each year, Americans pay nearly $100 billion in added healthcare costs due to smoking.
So is the war against cancer-causing cigarettes over? Have we finally learned enough to be able to put the tobacco companies out of business? Unfortunately, given the billions of dollars at stake, the tobacco companies have the incentive to adapt faster than the legislation. The new laws do not extend to e-cigarettes, the tobacco industry's newest strategy. Just like in the 1950s when the tobacco companies claimed their cigarettes were healthy, the tobacco industry has moved on from the traditional cigarette to a new modern form, such as the e-cigarette. The old tricks have found new life through technology, and the tobacco industry continues to lie to the public to promote their unhealthy products and addict a new generation of smokers. People around the world are searching for a cure, while 2/3 of the world's cancer-related deaths can be traced back to tobacco. What most people don't realize is that the cure to cancer is in their hands. All we need is the political will to fight the multi-billion-dollar tobacco industry. If this generation can see that there is nothing cool about ending your life on a ventilator, smoking might finally be snuffed out for good.
I'll tell you a story you'll never forget. A story about you and your cigarette. Enjoy smoother smoking, choose wisely, choose well. Smoke longer and finer and milder pell-mell. Pell-mell, pell-mell, pell-mell. Smoke longer and finer and milder pell-mell.